Well, David and Dejani and Nancy and Carolyn and Jan and Anne, thank you very much for your generous introduction. Now, I agreed very quickly to Nancy Seaver's invitation to open this very important exhibition before she had a chance to change her mind. And it is true, as Dejani said, between March 1983 until July 87, I had direct responsibility for Antarctica as one of my many roles as Minister for Science. And of course, Australia historically has had long interest in Antarctica, partly because our fascination with Captain Cook is very important, not only because of the east coast of Australia, also very important in Antarctica, because James Cook was the first navigator to cross the Antarctic Circle in resolution in 1773, January 1773, reaching 71 degrees 10 south, and he came close to, but did not actually sight, Antarctica. And then in January 1909, Douglas Mawson and Edgeworth David located the South Magnetic Pole as part of Ernest Shackleton's expedition. And the pole, notoriously, as you know, moves around quite rapidly. In 1911, the Australian government took a direct interest under Prime Minister Andrew Fisher in funding Douglas Mawson's Australasian Antarctic expedition, which explored Queen Mary Land. And both Amundsen and Scott used Hobart as their forward base for their expeditions to the South Pole. Australia claims 42% of Antarctica, far more than any other nation. Only 7 nations make territorial claims: Australia, Norway, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, France, Argentina and Chile. The claims are not recognised by other nations, but they're not contested either. And this is one of the reasons why no part of Antarctica is listed in the World Heritage List of UNESCO, because you have to be put up by a states party, and states parties aren't recognised as having any, there's no validity to their claims of ownership. It's true that Heard Island and McDonald Island in the sub-Antarctic are on the World Heritage List, but not the mainland. As Minister, I was, in law, administrator of Australian Antarctic Territory, but I never wore a plumed hat. And visiting our 3 bases would have required 4 to 7 weeks, depending on the weather, for the round trip by sea, longer if the ship was beset by ice. And I couldn't have afford to be away from Australia so long when my budget proposals were under constant attack. So I cared very deeply for Antarctica, still do. But I seized the opportunity to fly to Antarctica in December 1983 to visit the American bases together with a group of members of Congress and scientists. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life, and my host was the United States National Science Foundation. And we started in Christchurch, where the Americans had a forward base, and I flew in a C-141 Starlifter from Christchurch to McMurdo on the Ross Ice Shelf. McMurdo, the Greater McMurdo Conurbation, as the WAGs called it, was in New Zealand's territorial claim. James Clark Ross named it for Archibald McMurdo, one of his officers, in 1841. Antarctica's initial visual impact was profoundly disorienting, especially after nearly 5 hours in a darkened plain. I could see ultraviolet light tinting the snow. We were so conditioned to brown, green or yellow landscapes and the alternation of day and night that the uniform whiteness and perpetual sunlight seemed shocking. We flew from McMurdo to South Pole in a lumbering Hercules, visited the huge Amundsen Scott base, 3,000 metres above sea level, and were filmed at the photographic pole where visitors could drape themselves in their national flag. The temperature was minus 43 degrees Celsius, actually far colder than when Captain Robert Falcon Scott had been there. By walking briskly round the nearby geographic pole, I consoled myself that the 360-degree circuit brought me at last into Australian Antarctic territory, if only for a few seconds. On Ross Island, we inspected the Cape Evans hut erected by Scott in 1902, a prefabricated wooden structure miraculously preserved by the ice, full of artefacts and tinned food from the time of his fatal expedition in 1911-12. Mount Erebus, Antarctica's highest volcano, 3,794 metres on Ross Island, was pluming behind. Killer whales, the Orcinus orca, up to 10 metres long, were chasing seals onto the sand. Emperor penguins strutted. The sea was black. The sun blazed. No words could express my heart-stopping exhilaration. On another day, I observed that Mount Erebus had become completely obscured by whiteout, and the only mountain to be seen was the nearby Mount Terror, with a configuration similar to Erebus. An Air New Zealand DC-10 had crashed on Erebus in November 1979, killing all 257 people on board. The crash had been caused by a whiteout when the off-course pilot believed he could see Erebus in the distance just before impact. The McMurdo Dry Valley is in an ice-free area of 4,800 square kilometres. High-velocity katabatic winds prevent snow from falling, and the landscape resembles Mars. The wind over thousands, probably millions of years, has carved powerful sculptures, ventifacts, from the rock. I photographed scores of them in the Bull Pass and the Taylor Valley, sent copies to the sculptor Henry Moore, and he was amazed by their stark beauty. We also visited New Zealand's Scott Base and the beautiful Lake Vonda, a glacier. Later I climbed to the top of Observation Hill overlooking McMurdo and slithered much of the way down. I became increasingly preoccupied with greenhouse, ozone depletion, southern oscillation, El Nino, and marine biota issues, and Antarctica contributed vital information on all four. Drilling long ice cores provided an accurate history of climate change and atmospheric composition for centuries. Holes in the ozone layer were first detected by the British Antarctic Survey in 1981. El Nino had a devastating impact on years of drought in Australia, and marine biota was threatened by overfishing. One of my passions as minister with responsibility for Antarctica was to encourage artists to visit. Two of the painters in this exhibition, Jan Senbergs and Bea Maddock, went down in my period. Both have been ANU Creative Arts Fellows, as of course earlier on was Signey Nolan. Bea was injured in a fall on Heard Island on her 1987 visit. I also sent down my friend Stephen Murray Smith to report on morale, and he inevitably became known as Schmidt der Spy, or more strictly, Murray Schmidt der Spy. On Bastille Day 1987, there was a major reorganisation of government departments, and the title of Minister for Science became more of a letterhead filler than an office. I found myself as the back legs of the horse in the new super department of Industry, Technology and Commerce, DITAC. Responsibility for Antarctica passed to Senator Graham Richardson as Minister for the Environment. I think he had advice from Rene Rivkin. Anyway, losing Antarctica was a bitter blow, but in 1988, when the International Antarctic Place Names Committee improved the naming of Barry Jones Bay, already mentioned, it cheered me up a good deal. Saving the Antarctic from mining, at least for a 50-year period, was an outstanding personal achievement by Bob Hawke as Prime Minister. It was all his own work. Gareth Evans and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade thought at first it was mission impossible. But Hawke, the great persuader, sought and followed Jacques Cousteau's advice, lobbied very effectively with the support of Michel Rocard, the French Prime Minister, and President George Bush Sr., securing international agreement in June 1991 in the Madrid Protocol, overcoming concerns by the United States, United Kingdom and Japan. It has to be said, though, that the timing was important, and the timing was exactly the time of the Exxon Valdez disaster. And so the result was that even those people who were keen promoters felt this perhaps felt a bit nervous. This was not the right time to push. In January 2009, Rachel and I flew over Adélie Land and King George V Land in an Antarctic exhibition organised by the Royal Society of Victoria to commemorate the centenary of finding the South Magnetic Pole. Qantas provided exemplary service, as usual, but disappointingly, there was far more cloud cover than expected. Let me say something about the exhibition itself. There are 7 artists represented. Behind are the 6 images, very important images, by Signey Nolan. I'll say something about that. The 3 Jan Senbergs works are there, and behind on the other part of the screen. The works of Jorg Schmeisser are to be found up there. Anne Noble's work is immediately behind with the 5 great photographs. The work of Philip Hughes is out there, that's right, Philip Hughes' work is out there, and Bea Maddock's work is in a special area of its own. There are only 2 works in the catalogue, but in fact it's 21 separate works plus 7, because the sequence is tremendously important. And then there's a special area where Chris Drury's work is shown. 3 sets of video images shown, and then outside his inkjet print called Albatross. Just to say a few words to begin with Signey Nolan. In January 1964, Signey Nolan visited Antarctica for 8 days in the company of Alan Moorhead, and they were sent down on mission by the New Yorker. Later in the year, Nolan produced 68 paintings over 25 days, averaging less than 3 a day, which was a bit slow for Sid. Fewer than might have been expected. And 6 of them are on display here tonight, including a very powerful Mount Erebus, one of the best works I think he ever painted. Nolan wrote, and you can read it on page 17 and 18 of your catalogue, "One could feel this instantaneous fear at the first sight of Antarctica, that it could annihilate one. But this was overcome straight away by the sense of wonder in it. Your fear and your wonder are mixed up, and it's difficult to separate them." And that's, I think, a very accurate description of the quite extraordinary feeling that one has on first setting foot on Antarctica. I think we can claim that in Australia we've not only produced extraordinary artists, but we've also had great intellectual distinction. I think the quality of the work being carried out in Antarctica is extraordinary. The scientific research that we've carried out over a long period is exceptional. It has to be said of Jan Senberg's work, you see perhaps a rather rugged and brutal side of Antarctica, particularly in the Mawson image around the other side, but also in Davis here. This was the period of the great rebuilding program, where the previous government had determined that we wanted to have to create buildings in Antarctica that could be seen from the moon. And as a result, you had a period when essentially there was not much science going on, but a tremendous amount of construction work. So there was a period, I think the period when Jan and Bea Maddock were down, you probably had, it was probably in many ways showed Antarctica at least attractive at a time when there's tremendous commitment to rebuilding. And the situation now, I think, in the Australian bases is now really much more dramatic. So I think Antarctica's very important for us. I think Hawke's achievement in securing a 50-year moratorium, although admittedly nearly more than 20 of those years have gone, 30 more years in the moratorium against exploration were really very important. What I'm not quite sure about is whether, in some ways, we've lost our way about our overall objectives. I am concerned about, say, the changing nature of what's happened to our universities. That universities, which historically were regarded as communities of scholars, are now increasingly becoming trading corporations. And I can't help being disturbed by all I hear about the possibility that music, for example, might be gutted in this institution. Similar to the misguided attempts back in 2010 to close down ANAM, the Australian National Academy of Music, in Melbourne. The actual savings involved were ludicrously small. The amount of damage to the sense of our commitment to civilization was quite profound. And we don't think enough. The word civilization, perhaps, has fallen out of our vocabularies in many ways. It's certainly not talked about much politically. But our commitment to science is very important. The work that we've done in Antarctica is of tremendous, indeed, global significance. But we're also fortunate that Antarctica has attracted great artists. And all the artists who've contributed to tonight's wonderful exhibition, wonderfully hung, wonderfully laid out, recognise that there's something unique about that experience. Even if it's not possible for you to visit Antarctica yourselves, you can get a sense that here is something that is absolutely exceptional, that is beyond our experience of normality, and something to celebrate. And I congratulate all the people who've been involved in setting up and hanging this wonderful exhibition, and I'm very proud to be able to declare it open.